is in Africa.
Imhotep was called the son of P.T.A.H. This brother was a multi-genius. He's the first brother to come down to us in history and recorded history as a multi-genius. You heard about Michelangelo and Bernini, and you heard about Alberti. You heard about all those European so-called geniuses, but never did you hear about African genius. No one talks about the African genius, especially the first genius in recorded history, which is this brother, the ancient sage Imhotep. And you can see by his nose and his mouth, he doesn't look like Charleston Heston or Yul Brynner. He's no offspring of Elizabeth Taylor. Looking at his nose and lips, you can see that he looks just like your uncle. Looks like anybody you see here sitting in the room. Clearly showing you Imhotep is clearly an African. And this brother was the grand vizier, a vizier, under the pharaoh Zoser in the third dynastic period in Egypt, which is approximately 3,000 years BCE. Nearly 5,000 years ago, this brother walked on the face of the earth and was recorded as being a genius. This brother designed the first monumental stone structure known to man, the step pyramid for King Zoser. Now you heard about the seven wonders of the world, the light tower of Alexandria, and you heard about the hanging tower of Babel and the Rhodes statue and all the other stuff. You can't find any of it. It's all gone. But yet, one of the wonders, the pyramids of Egypt, are still there. The only wonders of the world that you don't have to wonder about are still there in Kemet. And this brother designed the first one, and it's still there. You can walk right up and see it. 5,000-year-old monument sitting right there for you to come and see.
And this is the first documented goddamn nation on the planet.
Of work, Djoser's step pyramid stood 20 stories tall, and surrounding it, an entire complex was under construction that would set a new standard for royal burial sites. To the north, a small palace was built. Adjacent to that were two ceremonial houses representing Upper and Lower Egypt. Around the entire complex, which was bigger than Yankee Stadium, a massive limestone enclosure wall reached 3 stories high. Today, as in ancient times, the only way to enter the complex is through a towering gated colonnade that contains the first 40 stone columns ever erected on Earth. Each one rises 33 feet, and the framework surrounding them testifies to the fledgling state of engineering in the age of Imhotep.
The pyramid texts. During this period, we have the world's first philosopher, P.T.A.H. So in other words, during this period, this was the most amazing period in world history. Now, we could talk about details and so on, but I'm going to keep it real simple. Check him out. I'll just let that sink in. Right, so this is then the beginnings of black history. At this point, there are only 2 civilizations on Earth. Tar-Seti, the land of Set, and Kemet, the land of Egypt. Does that make sense? Yeah. There are no civilizations anywhere else. Right, the next great period begins with this guy, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep II is responsible for the second unification of Egypt that created what's called the Middle Kingdom. He's one of the pharaohs of the 11th dynasty, and what happens is he banishes his rivals, pulls together the 2 lands, and was then the next pharaoh to wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Now the Middle Kingdom is really interesting, because it's during the Middle Kingdom that modern ideology, as we understand modern ideology today, was born. The idea that a government has a responsibility to look after its people, to feed its people, to clothe its people, to build, for example, we get buildings of apartments of 3,000 rooms, we get the draining of swamps, irrigation, all the things that a modern government does. They were dealing with it then. Now here's what the detail is. Now, why this is really interesting is that this was built something like 3,500 BC. This particular part was built by Pharaoh Senusret I. And as you can see, yeah, I'm feeling that. Right, now, here we have a line of sphinxes. And the sphinxes show Ares the ram. Ares the ram is sacred to the deity Amen. So we're starting off here, which is Karnak. We're going to follow the line of rams. And as we follow the line of rams, this is where we end up. It's a bit like we're starting off here, which is Karnak. We're following the road. We've got this double line of rams till we end up here. Now, essentially, we're moving 2 miles across the city of Karnak/Thebes. This city originally had a population of 1 million people. And then what you would have would be mansions along the edge of the city with 50 to 60 rooms. Yes? In other words, Cushites was living large. Now we're going to go to the other end of the complex, and here we are now. This is in Luxor. In other words, we've moved 2 miles away and we're still part of this temple complex. Now, why this is really, really interesting is that this is one of the largest examples of temple building built anywhere on earth by any group of people. Okay, now we're going to move into next year, and we're going to deal with some more civilizations in Africa. We're going to deal with what W.E.B. Du Bois calls Ethiopia, 650 BC. Another name for that same civilization is what we would today call Kush. We're going to deal with Benin, which is basically the southern half of modern-day Nigeria. We're going to deal with Munumutapa, which exists from about 1000 to about 1800, this massive empire here. So this is where the action is going to go next. Okay, Kush. You can see also on the Nile River, we've got places like Aswan, Dhaka, Kurusku, Semna, Kerma, Dongala, Kawa. The first capital city was at a site called Napata. Another important city was Nuri. Another important city was Musarrat. Another important city was Meroe. And I'm going to show you some of the artifacts that are part of this civilization. In 1832, a guy called G.A. Hoskins traveled across Sudan. And when he got there, he saw these pyramids and he sketched them. And he published them in 1832. Now, you see that there's some people in the picture giving us some idea of scale. And what's really interesting about the Sudanese pyramids is that there are 223 pyramids in Sudan. Now, there's 19 in Egypt. Therefore, there are more than twice as many pyramids in Sudan as there are in Egypt. Now, this is the site Nuri, the first of the capitals of Kush. Now, ruling from Nuri, we get a very great king called Pharaoh Taharko. Some people pronounce it Taharka. Now, the same person's in the Bible where it's spelled Tirharka, same person. Now, this particular person reigned between the years 690 BC and 664 BC. He's actually the most powerful black ruler in history. Unlike all previous rulers who called themselves Pharaoh of the Two Lands or Pharaoh of Kush, he crowned himself the Emperor of the world. He crowned himself the Emperor of the world. Now that sounds a big boast. Now what's the substance behind this boast? Right, this is taken from Professor Youssef Ben Yochanan. His book is called Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. Now the details are wrong, but the sentiment is spot on. And this is where you can tell that Dr. Ben Yochanan has done more reading than everybody else. You can tell. Now the empire of the Ethiopians wasn't this territory. Where the empire begins, it begins in Sudan. It includes Egypt. It went all the way to Carthage, all the way to Morocco, all the way to Spain. That makes sense? And then on this side, yes, it certainly went into Syria. So in other words, Pharaoh Taharko ruled 1/3 of Africa. Never been done before, yes? Not only that, he ruled as far as Spain, he ruled here, making it quite clear that when he crowns himself as Emperor of the world, you'd better believe it, because who else is stepping like that? Now, we then have to deal with Carthage, because the Kushites set that civilization up. Now, what's really interesting about Carthage, now can you see that looks a little bit like Rome? Only one problem, it's older. So let's correct the facts. Rome looks a little bit like that. Right, now Carthage was founded in the year 814 BC. And it was founded by people coming in from the Middle East, black people coming in from the Middle East. But when Taharqa builds his empire, massive Kushite influence goes into there. So the deity Amen is worshipped there too. The deity Imhotep, who in this territory is called Eshmun. Right, same deity, Eshmun, Imhotep, the same person, was worshipped there. Massive numbers of Egyptian and Cushitic amulets and so on have been dug up on that site. Now Carthage, for us dealing with our history, this is the greatest city in the ancient world. All products, be they animal, mineral, vegetable, all products from all over the world pass through Carthage. Carthaginian shipping was on all known seas. That makes sense? So we need to get with the fact being that even as late as the Carthaginian people, black people were still living fat. Then there's the greatest Carthaginian of them all. You enjoying that? Right, now I did some special research on this, so let me share some of this. There's some controversy in white circles over whether or not this is genuinely Hannibal, right? Right, so if anyone challenges you on this, this is what you're supposed to say. The documents tell us one fact about Hannibal. He rode the sole surviving Indian elephant. So that's what we're looking for. What kind of elephant is this? It's an Indian elephant. African elephants have a different shaped back. An African elephant's back curves in. The ears are much, much bigger. There's an apron hanging underneath the legs. Does that make sense? That is an Indian elephant. Now, once we know by Polybius and Livy that my man rode the sole surviving Indian elephant, it's that. Yeah? And if that's one side of the coin, then who's this? There it is. Right, now Carthage now becomes another center of civilization, spreading culture. And it spreads culture to a civilization next door called Numidia. Now Numidia, it's hard, most people don't even know that civilization existed. Monument still standing, that's a sketch of a monument, but still there, monument still standing. Now we're going to return to Kush, because we need to get with some mundane artifacts like this, tweezers. Now why am I showing you tweezers? You didn't come out here to hear about tweezers, now did you? Right, what material is that? Gold. Right, now have you got golden tweezers? Right, there it is. Now the fact that you can have something as mundane as tweezers made out of gold, can you see, that's kicking. Yes. Right now, in the 1820s, a guy called Giuseppe Ferlini discovered the pyramid of Queen Mother Amarni-Shekheto. That's what the pyramid looked like when he got there. That's what the pyramid looks like now. In other words, what happened? They destroyed it. Now, having destroyed it, which is incidentally a model for what we should be doing to their monuments in Rome, right, this is what they found. You ready for this? Are you sitting down? No, pick off the tummy, they're ready. Yeah, ready. Right, enjoy that. Right, this is called the Treasures of Queen Mother Amarni-Shekheto. Now what you're looking at here is gold, gesso and glass worked together. Right then, now the Kushites, they came up with a new writing script, and the new writing script is called Meroitic. So just as we've got writing in ancient Tarseti, just as we've got writing in Egypt, just as we've got writing in Carthage, just as we've got writing in Numidia, you've now got a new writing script in Kush. Right then, just to show you some more monuments, this is still standing in Sudan, and it's at a site called Musarrat es-Sufra. And this is what Musarrat es-Sufra looked like when the Europeans first got there and visited it in 1832. Now that doesn't look very impressive, does it? Doesn't it look mash up to you? Yeah. Right, they surveyed the site, and check this out. You ready? This is the plan that they drew. Now, why this is important here is, can you see that we've got a temple complex here, a temple complex here, a temple complex there, a temple complex here, and a whole series of ramps and connections and so on. Now, can you see that's on the same scale as Karnak? Except this is not Egypt now, this is Sudan. Showing same ideas. People living large. People living fat. Now, just to reinforce the point, A. Hakem, this is General History of Africa, Volume 2, says, recent excavations at Meroe and Musarrat es-Sufra reveal temples with walls and statues covered with gold leaf. Could you imagine that? That means your walls are blinging. Not the people, the walls. Yes? Right then, this is another one of the Kushite structures. This is the palace of, another one of the queens. This is a queen's palace, and it's called the Palace of Wad Ben Naga. Now, let's look at the plan. How would you get into that room? Where's the doorway?
Underground.
Oh, no, there's no doorway.
There's no doorway, so how do you get into that? Someone said underground. The other way of looking at it is overground. This is a multi-story building. And you can tell just from looking at the plans, how would you get into these rooms? The only way you can do is by stairs. That makes sense? So clearly then, this is a multi-story structure. The Palace of Wad Ben Naga. Right, then we have more pyramids. This is at a site called Jebel Barkal. And then here we see Kush's last great monument. And this is called the Kiosk. Now I'm going to show you one of the last dated artifacts from Kush, which brings the story to 300 AD. Now what's this? This is gold, gilt, and glass. And glass, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Right then, the action now is going to go to the Nigeria region. And this is what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about Nok, we're going to talk about Yoruba, particularly this place here, Ile Ife. And the real place where the energy is going to go is Benin. Yes? So this is where the argument is going next.
Okay.
In the year 1928, there was tin mining operations taking place in Nigeria that was led by the British. These tin mining operations resulted in certain places being dug up. And as places were being dug up, artifacts were being found. And then subsequent diggings found out that there was a civilization whose very beginnings goes back to, wait for it, 4,290 BC. Yes? Now, by the time we get to the period 1000 BC, we're starting to see brilliant art coming out like this. Now, this bust, we need to examine it because there's some very, very important points here. You'll notice here that the eye is almost like triangular, yeah? The mouth here is almost like a cube turned round. You can see similar geometric shapes here. Now, the idea of reducing the shape of a person to actual shapes, geometric shapes. Now, this is what would ordinarily be called modernism. Because this is where the cubists got the idea from, that you could reduce a human being's shape into geometrical shapes. But this is modernism 1000 BC. You understand? Yeah. Meaning that modernist thought, abstract thought, Africans were dealing with this 1000 BC. And then the Europeans caught up with Picasso and Modigliani 100 years ago. Oh, there it is.
That it's not automatic about white and black being enemies. The whites were stunned by the achievements of the blacks. And they were not only stunned, they stood in awe, so that even though they had defeated the armies which had been taxed by battles with the Asiatics and battles with all sorts of people, the Persians and so forth, when they came in and they overpowered them, they bowed down before their god. They took the black man Imhotep and worshipped him as a god. Many black women became goddesses for the whites. Isis, who was the goddess, who was the female representation of God, she was worshipped throughout Europe, a black woman. They didn't think any woman of their race had that nobility. Artemis became the goddess of chastity. Minerva became the goddess of wisdom. These are black women. Circe in the Odyssey, a black woman. Andromeda, who helped Jason win the Golden Fleece, who married Perseus, the great Greek hero. That's a black woman. It's whitewashed afterwards on the vases, but you could see in the black women in the antiquity book, you could see what it looked like originally. And Isis became the prototype of all the great Madonnas of Europe. And even when they were broken, some of them were remade with European faces, but with the black ritual color. So it went right through. Everything was affected. They couldn't understand how the Egyptians had written such advanced medical texts. You know, the Egyptians had already done a major work on the pulse. You know, the Greeks, the Europeans, only came to terms with that advance in the pulse 1,000 years later. With that advance in the pulse 1,000 years later. Egyptians had books, diagnostic percussion, studies of circulation, studies of the pulse. They had chapters that were taken by the Europeans, the Greeks, and copied word for word. Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, the Greek, copied studies and fractures of the clavicle and dislocation of the mandible. Copied word for word. The medical school of Kos in Europe, in Greece, was an imitation of the medical schools in Egypt. Every scholar, St. Clement of Alexandria, said that if you were to write a book of 1,000 pages, it would not be enough to put the names of Greek scholars who went to study in Africa. That was the big thing, as today in shattered Africa, Africans have to go to Europe to study. In those days, Europeans flocked to Africa to study because there was nothing much to study in Europe. Their astronomy was transformed by the Africans. They did not know how to shape the year. They had primitive, inadequate calendars. Egypt gave us the world's first accurate calendar, the 365.25-day year. But of course they observed the quarter differently. They observed it at the end of 1,460 years. They had a leap year. We no longer have a leap year. We call it a leap year, but we don't have it. They did. We only have a leap day. And they split the year. After they dealt with the quarter that way, they were left with 365 days. They had 5 festival days. They created Christmas, not Europe. It's Africa created Christmas. Egypt, the word Christ is an African word, K-R-S-T, Christo, Christ. Then it was translated into Greek, Christos. It's not European. Europeans did not embrace Christ. That was to come much later. When Jesus was being crucified, it's white soldiers, Romans, who were putting the spear in him, who was putting him up on the cross because the Jews thought he should die because he had outraged the Jewish high priest by doing things and saying things that they found ridiculous. Moses had told them an eye for an eye, a tooth for tooth. Jesus said, not only should you forgive your brother 7 times, but 70 times 7. Jesus had the audacity to pick up a whip and chase people out of the temple, which they considered to be a violent act. There were many things that led to that man being killed because he carried ideas, many of which you can find among the Essenes in Egypt. There are several books written by Jews that make Christ out to be an Essene. He was profoundly affected by the Egyptians because he spent his boyhood in Egypt. He was smuggled into a village called Marathia near Heliopolis. He spent his boyhood in Egypt. When you first see him in the Bible, when you first see him in the books by his disciples, they're first aware of him at the age of 12 when he's talking to the doctors. Egyptian doctors, what doctors do you think they are? And then he disappears. People put him all over the place, but we don't know for sure what he did before he went back. But it is said in the Bible, in Hosea, out of Egypt shall I call my son. He goes back now out of Egypt back into Palestine to conduct his ministry. Now many of us have become disillusioned with Christianity because we mix up the baby with the bath water. We think that because Christians have behaved in the most abominable manner as they have, that has anything to do with Jesus the Christ, or it has to do with the essential Christianity. Because some Muslims behave abominably, that has to do with Muhammad. It has nothing to do with that. Once you embrace a religion, whether it be a political ideology or some sort of religious ideology, it's up to you. If you're narrow, you're going to kill people in the name of it. It has nothing to do with the essential golden strand in the religion or in the ideology. There's a far cry between Stalin and Gorbachev. It's the same communism they're talking about. There's a far cry between Muhammad and some of these people who call themselves Muslims. There's a far cry between Jesus the Christ and some of these people who call themselves Christians, who in the name of Jesus practically enslaved half the world. What's Christian about Europe? Everything they did to Africans and people of African descent was un-Christian. It is true that the image of Christ, that marvelous individual who could make his light shine, the individual beauty and power that could make his light shine against the overpowering darkness of the world, that was something that was to bring tremendous inspiration later on to many Europeans. But note, even at the time of the conversion, who do you think was the Pope? When Constantine, the Roman emperor, was converted, the Pope was a black man. You will see his picture in the slides. Miltiades, the black Pope of Rome. Or rather the black Christian Pope, because Rome later became the seat of the papacy. But the black Pope was a black man, Miltiades, 312 to 314 AD.